Well, welcome back to Finding the Good, where we are sharing about God's amazing, awesome, never ending goodness in our life. And today I have the lovely Amanda here with me. I'm so excited that she's going to be
Hi.
sharing part of her testimony today. I actually met Amanda a few months ago at her brother in law's birthday party, Trey. And it's really cool because Amanda, Trey, and Alexis, which is Amanda's sister, they all grew up with my husband. And so it's just kind of cool to start meeting people who are in his world because for so long we were in San
Right.
Antonio. So he met a lot of my friends and
Mhm.
family. And when I got there to the birthday party, everyone was just so friendly and welcoming. And so thank you so much for
Aw,
embracing me. It means so
of
much
course.
to meet y'all. I've heard so much about you guys, and so it's so good to finally meet y'all. So, how are you doing? How is your New Year's going so far?
You know what? It's been wonderful. Just enjoying this new year. God's been doing a lot of heart things
Mm-hmm.
in preparation, I think, for what's coming this year. I feel such a real release of breakthrough that's coming.
Yeah.
But it's like in order to be able to step into the new, the Lord's still doing some foundational things and heart things. And so many people, I've talked to so many people are in the same place. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's a very raw place to be, but it's also super encouraging. So
Yeah.
it's been beautiful. It's been good.
Love it, love it. Like I said, I met Amanda a few months ago, and as I was thinking about girls to interview for this upcoming year, I thought about Amanda, and so I reached out to her, and she was like, "Hey, I've actually been thinking too about wanting to come
Yeah.
on," because I always encourage women if you have a story you want to share, like please email me, please message me, let's chat. And so it was just really cool to see that God had already placed that on her heart too. So before we get into it, why don't you just go ahead and tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thanks for having me. It's a joy to be here, and
Mhm.
you're a joy. It's a joy to get to know you.
Thank you.
So my name is Amanda Blair Jamison, and I am a worship leader. I'm full-time ministry. I am a single mom to three beautiful children, which I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about my story coming up. But Samuel is 13, Adelie is 12, and June is 10, and they are amazing. I am currently I lead worship. I also do a little bit of hair. I went to hair school
Hmm.
right when I graduated and loved doing that. I do a little bit of that on the side still, just as a creative outlet. And I love that, and a songwriter. So right now I'm in the studio right now working on some new singles. So I'm super excited about that and hoping to release some new things this year. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. And I live in Dallas area, and I am leading worship at a ministry called Kingdom Encounter Ministries.
Yeah, she
So,
has a beautiful voice, so
oh,
definitely
thank
need to
you.
check
Thank
her out.
you.
Well, today Amanda is sharing her testimony about how the Lord held her through a 10-year marriage and just kind of how he redeemed her when all of it ended. And so I wanted to kind of start at the beginning. Where did
Yeah.
you meet your ex-husband? How did the
Um,
relationship begin?
Yes, I want to share too, just really quickly as we get started. Like, this is actually a huge step. This is the first time I've actually shared my story,
Hmm.
like live, like outside of one-on-one with women. And so I really felt like the Lord was like, this is coming. And
Hmm.
so it's such a joy to be here in a safe place to be able to do that. So thanks for that. And yeah, me and my husband, we grew up in church together. I actually remember the first time I met him was 5-year-old Sunday school class. We were
Wow.
friends for forever. We were in the worship team. I started leading worship at the age of 14 in the youth group, and he was our drummer. And I was leading in the main sanctuary by around 17. And once again, he was on the team in and out. And so we grew up together. We had been friends for forever. And probably around the age of 18, he came to me, and he basically shared that the Lord had showed him that I was his wife,
Hmm.
and which was really beautiful because God had already actually been putting that and placing that in my heart. And so we got married at the age of 21. So
Hmm.
we were 21 when we got married. And that's kind of the beginning of how we met and just
Mhm.
the beginning of our story.
Yeah, and so what was that, marriage like in the
Mhm.
beginning?
There were a few red flags that the Lord began to show me, and I'm a huge advocate for marital counseling. I think it's so important,
Mhm.
but I think more important, it's the ability to be vulnerable. So if I have new couples all the time that I sit with in our ministry, and one of the biggest things I encourage them is how important it is to do that marital counseling with someone you trust, with people
Yeah.
that can pour into you and to give you that strong foundation, but more importantly, the willingness to be completely vulnerable. Like it's
Mhm.
in that space that everything has to come out on the table. And so that you can have a
Yeah.
strong foundation going into this marriage, and something beautiful that you can build upon. And I think that was one of the first things that I found out later down the road. There were several things that hadn't come out that I think
Mm.
would have made a huge difference if
Mhm.
we could have walked through some healing that probably was carried into our marriage that I was
Yeah.
unaware of at the time. So the first year, it was, I would say it was a really beautiful journey. I mean, it was a lot like a really great friendship.
Mhm.
And when things begin to shift and change, we were planning to wait a little while to have kids. And I found out I was pregnant with our first son about 6 months after we got married. It was a
Mm.
surprise, and a
Yeah.
beautiful surprise.
Mhm.
But right after our son Samuel was born, I began to see a shift in him, in my ex. And it I realize now, looking back, a lot of it had to do with those things that I wish would have come up. And I
Mhm.
realized there's a lot of father trauma there.
Mhm.
And he came in one evening and looked at me and said, "I did not sign up to be a father this soon. I don't know how to be a dad." And
Yeah.
a lot of that coming from the pain and the trauma. And that right there, it almost completely flipped our whole world upside down.
Mm.
And I found myself 21, 22 then with a brand new baby, a
Mhm.
3-month-old baby, and alone. And I never would have imagined that that would be my story.
Yeah.
And he was an amazing musician. There were a lot of other pulls pulling him towards just the things of the world. And instead of having um, that safe place and being willing to be vulnerable, he found comfort in the things of the world and the
Mm.
music industry. And from that point on, it was probably about an 8 to 9 year just roller coaster ride from that point on, of where
Well.
the Lord would begin to move on his heart, and he would want to do the right thing, and he'd come home and we would get in the counseling and then, it would be, he would start a band, or what would, these different choices he would make, and that
Mhm.
would lead him back to that same lifestyle.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, how did the
Mhm.
Lord comfort you and guide you
Yeah,
during that time? I'm sure it's difficult because as a wife, you do want
yeah,
to submit to your
yes,
husband, you want to be
yes,
faithful, but it's like,
yeah,
you serving the
yes,
Lord and then your husband struggling,
yeah,
like I'm sure that's just such a pull. And so,
yes.
how did the Lord guide you and comfort you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can honestly say those were some of the most beautiful seasons with the Lord. And I look back and I get teary every time because of his goodness. I'll never forget, there was one particular moment where I was literally laying in my bed and I'm holding Samuel and he's tiny. And I just remember the heart, just the pain
Hmm.
of the season that we were in, and that longing to have that beautiful marriage that I thought this was going to be, and I couldn't control what was happening. And I'll
Mm.
never forget laying there and the physical presence of the Lord falling in the room, and it's like I could feel the weightiness of his presence. It literally moved the bed, and
Hmm.
it was like this umbrella of love. And the Lord literally whispered over me. He's like, "I will carry you through the season. Like, you will know
Mm.
me as master. You will know me as husband. You'll know me as provider. I'll be a father to your children."
Wow.
And I knew in that moment at the very beginning, I knew that it was going to be a journey. And I felt the Lord almost extend an invitation for me to stand, and like
Mm.
that invitation to stand in the gap,
Yeah.
for my husband at the time, and also that no matter what, I'll never leave you and I'll never forsake you, and I will be
Mm.
here. The hardest struggle for me with my whole story, and even the fact that this is the first time that I'm sharing, is I am like a huge advocate for marriage, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
my heart is like, Lord, what you put together, let no man separate. And
Mm.
so it was really beautiful, because when our story began to come to an end, which I'll share a little more in a minute,
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget. I had family members and friends going, "You need to leave. You need to leave. You need to leave." And
Mm.
it wasn't until I had the Father speak to my heart, and He said, "Now it's time." There are moments in our lives where, um, really, the only way we learn certain things are through seasons of suffering.
Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful, one of the beautiful things I love that Bill Johnson actually said, and I carried it with me through that season, is like, in heaven, we will praise, we'll worship Him forever from a place of just such peace and joy. He says, but it's only on earth in moments of suffering that we get to release a sacrifice of praise. It's
Mm.
only in moments when nothing's going right that we have the opportunity to bring to the altar before the Lord a sacrifice of love, a sacrifice of praise in the midst of suffering. And it's the most beautiful thing that moves His heart. And Lord began to show me in those moments of suffering, like there was nothing else that moved His heart more than, as for me as a daughter, as beloved, to come to Him and go, my heart is in pain. It
Mm.
doesn't make sense. I don't know
Yeah.
how to fix this. I can't fix this, but you're good. And there
Mm.
were moments that I failed. There were moments that was not there. There were moments like, what in the world?
Yeah.
But there were also these beautiful moments of grace where He gave me the ability to praise Him in the midst of it.
Mm,
And
that's good.
it was really beautiful. As our 10-year marriage came to this point of an end,
So this was like the turning point right here.
yes, this was
Okay.
the turning point.
Mm-hmm.
And this would have been years and years of standing in the gap for Him, which looked
Mm-hmm.
like there would be times I didn't know where He was, what He was doing, but I'm on my knees, put my babies to bed, and I'm on my knees declaring life over Him and calling Him
Wow.
into the kingdom and
Mm-hmm.
believing and standing for my marriage, that God, you can do this. I know you can do this, and I know you can heal my husband.
Mm.
Until we got to a point, the turning point was, I began to see a shift in him, like just specifically like attitude. And I knew something else was going on, just deeper than the alcohol, deeper than music, deeper than the
Mm-hmm.
band, and just living a life of the world. And I knew something deeper was going. And I realized at that point, there was a lot of drug abuse going on.
Mm.
And because of that, his behaviors became very abusive. And it was that moment that I began to feel a shift. And I'll never forget the moment. It's like I just mustered up this courage, and honestly, it was very hard for me to do,
Mm-hmm.
because there was still this part of my heart that wanted to cover him and believe for him, but I also knew that this was not okay, and I needed to get help. And so I sat down with someone I trusted, and I said, "This is happening." And that was the moment they said, okay, we have to do something. Like, this
Mm-hmm.
cannot keep happening. So we had a meeting with all of us, and
Yeah.
sat down with him, and had everything laid before him, and said, hey, like, we want you to know we love you, and we will do whatever it takes to get you freedom and to get you healing. But we have physical proof this is happening, and this has to stop. All you have to do is admit that there's a problem. And that was the moment that he basically said, y'all are framing me, and this is
Mm.
crazy. And he walked out of the room. And I remember going home that night, and I remember sitting on the floor of my room. I tucked all my babies in, and I was sitting on the rug in my room. And I just remember just tears, because I could feel it coming. I felt the shift coming, and there was a grieving. And I remember my heart cry was, but Lord, I know that you hate divorce. I remember that
Mm.
cry, like
Mm-hmm.
literally physically coming out of my mouth. And my mouth was, but God, I know you hate divorce. And it was like the audible voice of the Lord whispered, and He said, but I hate when my sons abuse my daughters more, and we're done. And it's
Mm.
like, I literally in the spirit saw Him draw a line, and He said, he's mine. Like, will you give him over to me now? Like,
Wow.
you've stood faithful and you carried what I asked you to carry, and now it's my turn.
Mm.
Because of a choice he made, now it's my turn. And
Yeah.
it literally, the Lord asked me to hand him over. And even in the midst of that, after, the Lord began to even show me and reveal to my own heart where I had really idolized this idea of God saving my marriage. And
Mm.
God even said, Amanda, you idolized this idea of what I was going to do in your marriage more so than you put me on before everything, but
Yeah.
with obedience and love. And my heart position became, Lord, you have to do this because we're going
Mm-hmm.
to do this and we're going to do this. And it's going to be this beautiful picture. And God's going, will you be obedient? Even if it doesn't,
Wow.
if it looks crazy to the world, if it looks
Mm.
like the opposite of what people think of what I might do, but will you
Mm-hmm.
trust me? And then my next prayer was, but Lord, I don't want to call it. I
Mm.
don't want to be the one to call it.
Yeah.
And I've got a call on my phone about 10 minutes later from one of my spiritual fathers who had been walking me through this. And this is why it's so powerful to have these people in your life. And he called me on the phone and he said, Amanda, I just saw Matt. I just saw in the spirit, the Lord showed me everything. Matt's going to walk in the door and he's going to ask you for a divorce. And the Lord said to give it to him. And
Wow.
it was like the solid, I had to hear it. I needed
Mm-hmm.
someone. I'd heard it from the Lord and I
Yeah.
knew it was coming, but I needed a father, a father to say, it's okay. This
Mm-hmm.
is what God's asking of you and it's okay. And, and so we hung up, they prayed over me. Him and his wife prayed over me. I hung up and sure enough, he walked in the door, 10 minutes later on the clock. And he looked at me and he said, I want a divorce. And I just said, okay. And he packed his bags and he left. And that
Mm.
began a 2-year journey of, he ran from the divorce papers. It was like, if I can't
Mm.
have you, no one will have you. And one of my heart cries in that season was, Lord, I don't want this to be my children's story. I'll never forget, there's a beautiful friend who prophesied over me and my kids. And she looked at me and she didn't know my story at the time. And she looked at me and she said, you've been through the fire, but your children don't smell like smoke. And I began to
Mm.
weep because it was my
Mm.
heart cry. As a mother, my heart cry was like, Lord, don't let this phase them.
Mm.
And I have just been amazed at how God has carried my kids and carried me through this season. And once again, coming back to what he whispered over me in that first moment was, I'll be father, I'll be husband, I'll be provider. Just trust me. Um, yes. And he literally has done that in so many ways.
I love so much that you did not move until God told you to.
Yeah.
Just the importance, you said it might look crazy to the world, but
Yeah. Yeah.
follow, obey me, just be in obedience.
Yes.
And so, if you could just share a little bit about that to,
Mhm.
the women who might be watching, just the importance
Yes.
of spending time with the Lord and waiting on
Mhm.
Him and not taking
Yeah.
matters into our own
Yes.
hands, because your
Mhm.
story probably could look very different if you decided
Yes.
to act
Yeah.
on your own actions, but instead you
That's right.
chose to stand firm on the Lord and not move until He said. And so, could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I think that is one of the biggest things that I love to encourage women and that are going through hardships in their marriage
Mm-hmm.
is the importance. I mean, people will always have opinions, people always have thoughts, but the importance of having that relationship with the Lord, being able to see outside of your own pain and
Mm-hmm.
outside of the trauma of what's going on, and having the ability and the maturity and if to lean into the Lord and go, where is your heart in this moment? Like, what are you speaking right now? Because it's right, if I had moved too soon, if I have moved too late, all of it, there's the timeline of the Lord is so powerful, and it's so important for us to understand the times and seasons. And I had so many people that were saying it was the wrong choice, I should have never done that. And to this day, in my heart, I know that I made the right decision in that
Mm-hmm.
moment. And God began to show me about, even in that moment, the agreement to go, even in the midst of suffering, Lord, yes, let there be a willingness in my spirit to walk through suffering. And as Christians, that is, as believers, as sons and daughters, that is one of the most beautiful promises and invitations I think that we get to walk in. It's easy to see all the promises that look flashy and
Yeah.
but it's another to see an invitation of really what Jesus lived his whole life. And that was a life of he laid down his life, and to go, Lord, in everything, would you teach me in the midst of suffering and in the midst of joy? Would you teach me what it looks like to live a life of praise, to live a life of surrender? First, I want to share the testimony of how the divorce was finalized, because I think it's really important. He ran for 2 years from the divorce papers, and during that season, it was so tough. And I just remember having friends and people going, you've got to go into the courtrooms of heaven and deal with this from the courtrooms. I'm like, that is beautiful. Like, I have encounters, like I know the Lord, but it feels like crickets. Like, that's amazing, but I don't hear anything. I'm not seeing anything. And meanwhile, God was beginning to shift me and my kids to Dallas, and to take this role as a worship leader with a ministry with some spiritual father and mother that had walked me through a lot of this. And as we got over, I'll never forget, I dropped my kids off at school for the first day, and I came home and I sat down on the rug with the Lord. And the Lord came to me and he said, I want to walk you through a process of forgiveness. And he said, I want to take you on a journey, and I want you to be able to see him again the way that I see him. And he met me for 2 weeks. Every day I'd drop my kids off and I'd come home and I'd sit with him. And he met me for 2 weeks on the rug of my living room. And he would show me different phases of my husband at the time, different moments in his life where he had been wounded, and why he had done the things he had done to me, because they were coming from a wound. And I, for 2 weeks, I would see him and I would be able to say, I forgive you for the pain that you caused me, and I release you. Until that last day, I saw the man that I had married and was able to look him in the eyes and see him as a brother. And for the first time, begin to weep over him in the state of where his soul was, and wept for him, and said, and be able to release him and say, I forgive you for the pain that you caused. And I bless you and I release you into the hands of the Lord, whatever it takes, Lord, for you to bring him back. Lord, let it be. And I'll never forget the weight that came off in that moment. Just being able to see him through the Father's eyes and not through the pain that had been caused. And for the first time, be able to really love him as a sister and go, I bless you and I release you from all the pain and all my trauma. And it was a week after that I was in a worship service, and I just remember closing my eyes, and I just was like in full faith. I just was like, Lord, I come into the courtrooms of heaven and I ask you to judge righteously and justly and let this be done. And that was it. I didn't feel anything. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anything. It was complete faith. And I closed my phone, and I got a text probably about 30 minutes later, and it was my dad. He said, can you call me? So I stepped out of the worship meeting. I called him, and he said, did you hear what happened? And I said, no. And he said that the SWAT team had come in and taken a bunch of people down, and he was in the mix. And he said, you're getting divorced on Monday. We need you to come. We need you to come home. And so I hit the floor and I just began to cry. And I was like, Lord, what made the difference? I've been doing this for 2 years. And the Lord so sweetly spoke over me. And he said, Amanda, you have no rights in my courtroom without perfect love, but you positioned your heart in love, and it gave you the authority to come in and to bring him before the throne and before the judgment seat of the Lord. And he said, this looks like justice for you, but it also looks like justice for him, because had he had stayed, it would not have been healthy for him. So I'm so pleased to say that at this point, the Lord is really doing a work in his life, I believe. And we're still, as far as me and the children, God has promised me throughout all of that. Once our divorce was final, the Lord began to speak over my heart. And he said, Amanda, I have someone so beautiful, so wonderful. It is coming. There is you'll see my faithful hand in this.
Mm.
Once again, I'll be husband. I'm bringing you into season. I will be husband. I'll be father to your children. But there is someone coming, and you're not going to be alone forever, but trust me. And so I've literally been a season of just waiting on the Lord and loving on him and being a mama. And we, every night, me and my children pray for him, and we bless him and they communicate with him, and we're cordial. He's
That's
doing
amazing.
well. And we're still believing to see the full fruit of salvation in his life. My kids actually can see for a healthy picture of forgiveness, you know, that it's been
amazing.
such a covering and a cloak for my children. And I think to be able to bless him and release him and be just healthy communication of going, this was not a good picture of a godly husband. This was not a good picture of a godly father, but God is, and he'll never leave us. He'll never forsake us. He's guiding us. He's covering us. He's leading us. And in the midst of it, we're going to bless him, and we're going to love him, and we're calling him into the fullness of what God has for his life. And I'm watching my kids be able to do that. And in the midst of it, it's brought such healing to my ex. There's been moments where he's thanked me and even my kids and said, thank you. Like I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for your prayers. It hadn't been for standing in the gap. One of the scriptures that I have just like stood on throughout this journey is in Isaiah 54. And the whole thing is beautiful, but there is 4 and 5. It says, do not fear, for you will not be put to shame, and do not feel humiliated or ashamed, for you will not be disgraced. You will forget the shame of your youth, and you will no longer remember the disgrace of your widowhood. For your husband is your maker, the Lord of hosts is his name, and your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel. And it literally became my portion in this season, and going, my husband is my maker, and just allowing him to speak that over my life.
That's so beautiful. And I love where you involved your children, but not in a
Yes.
awkward,
Yes, it's
painful
important.
way. Like I
Yes.
think that's something I think about,
Yep.
when John and I have our kids, just
It's
like
important.
how I want to involve them in what we're doing, but not in a
Yes.
hurtful way where we're
That's right.
pinning them again. If John
Yes,
and I are
that's
in an
right.
argument, we're not
Yes.
pinning our children to pick a
Yep.
side or whatever, but instead
Yep.
you're allowing them into this journey of healing
Yeah,
and praying for their dad too.
that's
That
right.
is huge. That's such a
Yep.
beautiful example you're setting for
That's
your
right.
kids.
Yeah.
So last question, you kind of
Yeah.
hit on it a little bit,
Yeah.
but can just looking back, can you just sum up some of the good things the Lord did during that time?
Of course. Yeah, one of them specifically is a beautiful memory and a story I'm going to share, and it has a lot to do with the children. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that is one of the things one of my joys in life is being a mom, and I love it. And that is something that was so important to me, because the truth is our kids are not oblivious. Like kids, they
Mm-hmm.
feel and they see.
Yeah.
And probably, honestly, sometimes I believe children are a lot more sensitive than even adults. Our children feel what's going on. And so being able to give them that language and an opportunity to have a voice in the midst of it, and to go, that hurt, or this hurts today, and to be able to teach them how to process that with the Lord, and to
Mm-hmm.
teach them how to walk through forgiveness, and how to pray and cover someone who you love but's not walking with the Lord in that moment, was really important. And one of the beautiful things one of my favorite memories of God's goodness in the midst of that season there was a moment where June, my littlest, she was very much a daddy's girl, and she came in one night. It was late one evening, and she came in, and I'm sitting on the couch, and she crawls up in my lap, and she bursts into tears, and she's like, "Mommy, I just miss Daddy. I miss him." And I am sitting in this moment and with her, and I'm like, Lord, how long? My heart cry as a mother is, how long do my kids have to go without a dad? Like, I
Mm-hmm.
already know you promised this is coming. Like, but I can feel her pain. And as a mother, your heart just aches for her. And it's like, in that second, I just took a deep breath and began to look through the eyes of the Spirit, and not out of my flesh, but Lord, what do you want to do in this moment? Like, what invitation are you extending to us? Because you promised you'd be Father. And so I looked at June, and I said, and she's probably 6'7" at the time. And I looked at her and I said, "Babe, I said, the Lord's promised he was going to be Father, and he never lets us down. He never leaves us, never forsakes us. So we're going to ask him to come like Papa. And so me and her are sitting on the couch. And what's beautiful about this story is a week before, I had a conversation with the Lord, and I said, Lord, I know you. I know who you are as Jesus. I know what you feel like, smell like when you come in the room. I know what you look like. I know what you feel like as Holy Spirit. I know you, but there's a disconnect of who you are as Father. And the Lord began to reveal in my own heart, because of my own pains and traumas, that there's a disconnect of knowing him as Father. And so I'm sitting here with my little girl, and I'm going, Lord, would you come like Papa? And there was literally a cry within my own heart, Lord, would you come like Papa? And all of a sudden in this moment, it's the thickest, most tangible presence of the Lord begin to fill the room. And she stops crying, and we sit in silence for probably 20 minutes, and you just feel the presence of the Lord in this moment. And I'm searching in this moment. I'm like, it feels like something. What does this feel like? Like, I've been asking him for a week, who are you as Father? And he just showed up in the room. And I'm like, man, what does this feel like? And all of a sudden it clicks. And I realize it feels like Christmas morning. And I was like, Lord, that's who you are as Papa. And it's like, I begin to smell the fragrance of the Lord like peppermint. And June looks up at me and with this biggest smile, and she goes, okay, I'm good. And she runs off. And I'm like, she had her hug from Papa and she felt it, and she was okay now. And meanwhile, I hit the floor. I'm like wailing, like, this is who you are as Father. And he began to solidify that in me. And I remember in that moment, God speaking to my heart, and he said, Amanda, because I was still that heart cry of how long do my kids have to go without having a Papa, a physical Papa. And he said, Amanda, at 6 years old, she had a need, and she learned in that moment how to come to me. At 6 years old, she had a physical, natural need, and she learned in a moment how to come to her Heavenly Father, and felt me meet that need, and was enough for her. And he's like, there are 40, 50-year-old people who don't know how to do that. But at 6 years old, no one will ever take that away from her. And to this day, she has such a knowing. I mean, she's so sensitive, and she knows who he is. And he spoke in that moment. He said, I will take everything that the enemy has tried to destroy, everything that the enemy thought he could destroy, and I will make beauty out of ashes. I will turn, and even more so in the sense, not even just help you survive through it, but I will actually like double over, and it becomes like a strength, literally, where the enemy thought he could have a right to put that pain and the longing and of that need of having a physical father, where God said, oh no, like I'll turn that around and flip it around, and she'll so know me as Heavenly Father that for the rest of her life I'll be enough. And you can't take that. It's little moments like that. And what's really powerful is I'm on the floor and I'm in this encounter with him, and my son Samuel walks in the room, and this is mid-July, by the way, and he goes, Mom, I know this is really weird, but I was just drawing in my room, and I felt like I was supposed to bring you this. And he throws this paper down on the floor, and it's a picture of Santa Claus with all these gifts. And it was like, okay, Lord, I get it. Just really sweet things like that, where we've literally watched him. And that was a moment of watching him be Father, physically, tangibly be Father to my children. And I could go on and on of moments like that have been so beautiful. But that is one of probably my favorites.
Yeah, I love that. Whatever we think we're missing physically, God shows up, and in a moment, he can be
That's right.
what we need.
That's right.
And so, well, thank you so much, Amanda, for being on and sharing your beautiful story. I feel honored that you would share it publicly for the first time here. I just know that people are going to get something out of this.
Amen.
And so, thank you again. I look forward to getting to know you more. And so, thanks for being on.
Thank you. I really appreciate you guys. And it's awesome. I've just loved watching this journey and watching you carry this so beautifully. So thank you. It's an honor.
Thank you.